Imagine an empire that lasted more than 600 years, ruled over 3 continents, and influenced the course of world history in ways we still feel today. An empire so vast that its capital, Istanbul, became the meeting point of East and West, of tradition and innovation. This is the story of the Ottoman Empire, an empire born from a small frontier principality that grew into one of the most powerful states the world has ever known. Its legacy is written not only in grand palaces and soaring mosques, but also in food we eat, words we speak, and music we hear today. In this series, we will uncover how the Ottomans rose, thrived, struggled, and transformed, leaving behind a history that is anything but forgotten. Stay with me as we step into the world of the Ottomans, where every chapter is more fascinating than the last. The story of the Ottoman Empire begins not with a mighty capital or a vast army, but with a small band of people living on the edge of great civilizations. To understand how this dynasty came to dominate lands across 3 continents, we must travel back to the late 13th century, when the frontiers of Anatolia were alive with uncertainty, opportunity, and ambition. At that time, the region of Anatolia, which today lies within modern Turkey, was a patchwork of principalities, tribes, and struggling kingdoms. The mighty Byzantine Empire still held Constantinople, though its power was fading. To the east, the Mongols had swept across much of Asia, leaving instability in their wake. Between these great powers, smaller Turkish groups known as beyliks tried to survive and thrive. Among them was a clan that carried the name of its leader, Osman. Osman, later remembered as Osman Gazi, was not born into wealth or grand status. He was the son of Ertuğrul, a leader of a small tribe who had sought refuge in Anatolia after the pressures of Mongol invasions pushed many nomadic groups westward. What set Osman apart was not his birthright, but his ability to inspire loyalty, to lead with vision, and to seize opportunities that others overlooked. From his name, the term Ottoman would eventually emerge, becoming the identity of a vast empire. Life on the frontier was dangerous but also filled with possibilities. The borders between the Byzantine Empire and Turkish principalities were fluid, with constant skirmishes, shifting alliances, and villages caught in between. For Osman and his followers, this environment was both a challenge and an invitation. It meant conflict, but also the chance to expand territory and influence. Osman is remembered in early stories not only as a warrior, but also as a leader guided by faith and a sense of destiny. One of the most famous legends about Osman tells of a dream he experienced. In this dream, he saw a great tree growing from his chest, its branches spreading wide across the world, shading lands far beyond his reach. Many interpreted this vision as a sign that his descendants would rule an empire stretching across continents. While historians may debate the accuracy of such tales, what matters is how the story captured the imagination of Osman's followers. It gave them a sense of purpose and a belief that their leader was chosen for greatness. From his small base in northwestern Anatolia, Osman began to expand. He took advantage of the weakened state of the Byzantine frontier and gained support from neighboring tribes who saw in him a leader capable of protecting their lands and advancing their interests. With careful alliances, strategic raids, and skillful leadership, Osman transformed his modest principality into a rising power. By the time of his passing, his successors had a foundation strong enough to continue growing far beyond what Osman himself could have imagined. The early Ottomans were not only warriors, they were also skilled at adapting to different cultures and traditions. Anatolia was a diverse land, home to Christians, Muslims, and Jews, as well as people of many ethnic backgrounds. This diversity became part of the Ottoman character from the very beginning. Unlike many powers that ruled by exclusion, the Ottomans often sought to incorporate different communities into their system, as long as loyalty was maintained. This flexibility would later become one of the secrets of their longevity. Geography also played a crucial role in the rise of the Ottomans. Situated at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, Anatolia was a place where trade routes converged. Caravans carried silk, spices, and ideas across the region. Whoever controlled this land had access to immense wealth and influence. For Osman and his descendants, the opportunity was clear. If they could expand westward toward Constantinople and eastward into the rich lands of Asia, they could become more than just another Turkish principality. They could become an empire. But before dreaming of empire, the early Ottomans had to secure their survival. The Byzantine Empire, though weakened, still posed a formidable challenge. Neighboring Turkish groups often competed with one another as much as with outsiders. To succeed, the Ottomans had to master the art of both war and diplomacy. In this, they proved remarkably talented. They formed marriages that secured alliances, rewarded loyalty with land, and made pragmatic decisions that allowed them to expand steadily rather than recklessly. The small town of Suut, where Osman established his base, became the symbolic heart of this new power. It was not a grand capital, but it represented the roots of a dynasty that would one day stretch from Hungary to Yemen, from Algeria to Iraq. In the rolling hills of northwestern Anatolia, among humble villages and battle-scarred frontiers, the seeds of empire were planted. As the 14th century dawned, the Ottomans were still far from the global force they would become. Yet their foundation was secure. Under Osman's leadership, and soon under his son Orhan, they began to capture Byzantine towns, expand their control over trade routes, and establish themselves as a state with lasting potential. The dream of empire, once only a story told by firelight, was slowly becoming a reality. Looking back, it is tempting to see Osman's rise as inevitable, as if history had already chosen him. In truth, his success came from a combination of vision, opportunity, and determination. Many tribes existed in Anatolia at that time, but only one would grow into the Ottoman Empire. The difference lay in leadership, adaptability, and a sense of destiny that carried the Ottomans beyond the limits of their humble beginnings. This is where the story of the Ottoman Empire truly begins, with a dream, a leader, and a small frontier principality that dared to imagine more. In the episodes that follow, we will see how this seed grew into a mighty tree, how it weathered storms of crisis, and how it shaped the world in ways that still echo today. The rise of the Ottoman Empire from a frontier principality to a world power is one of the most fascinating transformations in history. By the middle of the 15th century, the Ottomans had already expanded across much of Anatolia and into the Balkans. Yet the true turning point, the moment when the world could no longer ignore this new force, came with the fall of Constantinople in the year 1453. For more than 1,000 years, Constantinople had been the jewel of the Byzantine Empire. Its walls were legendary, its riches immense, and its position unmatched, standing at the bridge between Europe and Asia. Many had tried to capture it, but all had failed. Then came Sultan Mehmed II, later known as Mehmed the Conqueror. At only 21 years of age, he undertook what others had considered impossible. With determination, ingenuity, and careful preparation, he laid siege to the city. When Constantinople finally fell, the world changed forever. The Ottomans made it their new capital, renaming it Istanbul, and from that moment on, the empire entered what historians call its classical age. Istanbul quickly became more than just a political capital. It was a symbol of triumph, a hub of trade, and a center of culture. Within its walls rose magnificent mosques, bustling markets, and schools of learning. The Hagia Sophia, once the pride of Byzantine Christianity, was transformed into a mosque, blending past and present into a single space that reflected the Ottoman vision. From Istanbul, the Ottomans looked both east and west, seeing themselves as heirs to empires and as leaders of a new world order. The classical age of the Ottomans was not just about conquest. It was also about building systems that could sustain such vast power. The empire stretched across 3 continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa, and within its borders lived people of many faiths, languages, and traditions. To govern this diversity, the Ottomans developed a sophisticated system of administration. At the top stood the Sultan, seen not only as a political leader, but also as the protector of Islam. Yet the Sultan did not rule alone. He was supported by a council of advisors known as the Divan, which included viziers, military commanders, and scholars. This system balanced power and ensured that decisions could be made efficiently across such a wide realm. Religion played a central role in Ottoman life, but the empire was notable for its tolerance compared to many of its contemporaries. Christians and Jews, referred to as people of the book, were granted the right to practice their faith within a framework called the millet system. Each community managed its own affairs, its schools, its places of worship, its family laws, under the oversight of the Ottoman state. This arrangement allowed the empire to maintain peace among its diverse population, turning difference into strength rather than weakness. The economy of the classical age was equally impressive. With Istanbul at its heart, the empire sat at the crossroads of global trade. Caravans carried silk and spices from Asia. Merchants brought goods from Europe, and ships sailed across the Mediterranean with cargoes of grain, textiles, and treasures. The Ottomans taxed this trade wisely, filling their coffers while keeping commerce flowing. Cities such as Bursa, Edirne, and Cairo thrived under Ottoman rule, each contributing to the empire's wealth and cultural brilliance. Art and architecture flourished during this period. Inspired by both Islamic tradition and local influences, Ottoman architects created masterpieces that still stand today. Mosques with soaring domes and elegant minarets became symbols of faith and power. One of the most celebrated architects was Mimar Sinan, whose works, such as the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul, combined grandeur with harmony, leaving a legacy that shaped the skyline of cities for centuries. The Classical Age also produced one of the most renowned rulers in history, Suleiman I, known in the West as Suleiman the Magnificent and in the East as Suleiman the Lawgiver. His reign in the 16th century marked the peak of Ottoman power. Under his leadership, the empire extended from Hungary in the north to Yemen in the south, from Algeria in the west to Iraq in the east. Yet Suleiman's greatness was not measured only in lands conquered. He was also a reformer who organized the empire's legal codes, ensuring fairness and consistency in governance. His attention to justice earned him respect across his diverse realm. Suleiman's court was also a center of culture. Poetry, calligraphy, music, and textiles reached new heights under his patronage. The Sultan himself was a poet, writing verses under the pen name Muhibi. His court welcomed artists and scholars from many lands, turning Istanbul into a beacon of creativity that rivaled the Renaissance courts of Europe. The Ottoman Empire during the Classical Age was not a closed society. It was one that engaged with the world, absorbing ideas and sharing its own. Despite its strength, the empire faced challenges. Governing such a vast territory required constant attention to loyalty, communication, and resources. Wars were frequent, whether against European kingdoms or neighboring powers in the Middle East. Yet the Ottomans proved resilient, adapting to shifting circumstances and maintaining unity. Their administrative systems, military organization, and cultural achievements allowed them not only to survive, but to thrive in an era when many other states faltered. When historians speak of the Classical Age, they often emphasize its balance, the balance between tradition and innovation, between diversity and unity, between conquest and governance. This balance is what gave the Ottoman Empire its remarkable stability during the 15th and 16th centuries. While empires in other parts of the world rose and fell quickly, the Ottomans established a structure that endured. By the end of the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire stood as one of the most powerful and admired states on earth. Its armies were feared, its markets bustling, its culture celebrated, and its leaders respected. From the dream of Osman, the son of a frontier chief, The empire had grown into a force that touched the lives of millions across continents. This was the Classical Age, a period of magnificence, of law, of architecture, of poetry, and of power. Yet, as with all golden ages, it was not to last forever. Beneath the splendor lay tensions that would one day challenge the empire's strength. But that is a story for another time. For now, we leave the Ottomans at their height, a tree grown tall and strong, casting its shade across much of the known world. No empire in history ever rose in complete isolation. Ideas, goods, and beliefs flowed like invisible winds across borders, shaping societies in ways that no wall or army could stop. For the Ottoman Empire, these winds of influence were particularly strong. Situated at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, the Ottomans found themselves both receivers and givers of culture, religion, and trade. This episode explores how the empire was shaped by forces beyond its own borders, and how, in turn, it reshaped the world around it. From the very beginning, religion was one of the most powerful currents guiding Ottoman identity. The Ottomans saw themselves as protectors of Islam. When Sultan Selim I conquered the holy cities of Mecca and Medina in the early 16th century, the Ottoman sultans began to carry the title of caliph, the leader of the Islamic world. This gave their authority a sacred dimension that stretched beyond their empire's borders. Muslims from faraway lands looked to the Ottoman sultans for leadership, making the empire not just a political force, but also a spiritual one. Yet, while Islam was at the core of Ottoman rule, the empire also lived side by side with Christian and Jewish communities. These groups were not strangers. They were neighbors, craftsmen, traders, and scholars. The millet system, which allowed religious communities to manage their own affairs, gave them space to preserve their traditions. This openness created a society where diverse customs coexisted. The Ottomans, rather than isolating themselves, drew from the knowledge and skills of different groups. Greek architects, Armenian merchants, Jewish doctors, and Arab scholars all played roles in the empire's development. The winds of faith were not only Islamic but also interwoven with many traditions. Trade was another powerful influence. The Ottoman Empire stood on some of the most important trade routes in the world. Caravans from Asia brought silk, spices, porcelain, and precious stones. Ships sailing from the Mediterranean carried goods from Europe, Africa, and the New World. Istanbul became one of the busiest trading centers on Earth. In its markets, one could find Venetian glass, Persian carpets, Indian spices, and Egyptian cotton. The Ottomans benefited greatly from this exchange, but they also regulated it carefully, taxing goods and controlling routes to ensure their advantage. In this way, global trade shaped the empire's economy, while the empire itself shaped the flow of world commerce. This trade brought more than material goods, it carried ideas. From the Renaissance cities of Italy came artistic techniques and scientific curiosity. From Persia came poetry and architectural styles. From Arabia came religious scholarship. The Ottomans absorbed these influences and gave them new forms. For example, the art of miniature painting, which had Persian roots, flourished in the Ottoman court with its own distinctive style. Calligraphy, long valued in Islamic culture, became a refined art form in the empire, adorning mosques and palaces with graceful script. Even cuisine reflected this blending of worlds. Coffee, first popular in Yemen, became a favorite in Ottoman society, leading to the rise of the famous coffee houses that later spread to Europe. But the winds of influence were not always gentle. They could also bring storms. As European powers grew stronger in the 15th and 16th centuries, they sought new routes to Asia, bypassing Ottoman-controlled lands. The discovery of sea routes around Africa and across the Atlantic gradually reduced the empire's monopoly on Eastern trade. Spices and silks that once flowed through Ottoman markets began arriving in Europe by sea. This shift did not collapse the Ottoman economy immediately, but it marked the beginning of a challenge that would grow over time. The empire could not fully control the winds of global change. The Ottomans were also influenced by their rivals on the battlefield. Their military organization was admired and feared across Europe. The famous Janissaries, an elite corps of soldiers, were trained from childhood to serve the Sultan with discipline and loyalty. They were among the first armies to make extensive use of gunpowder weapons, giving the Ottomans an edge in battle. Yet their methods also drew from encounters with other powers. Contact with European armies brought knowledge of fortifications and new military techniques. The Ottomans were not only fighters but also learners, adapting foreign ideas to strengthen their own system. Diplomacy became another area where external influences played a role. The empire established relations with distant powers such as France, Venice, and even England. Ambassadors traveled to and from Istanbul, carrying reports, letters, and gifts. Through these exchanges, the Ottomans learned about European politics, while Europeans marveled at the grandeur of the Ottoman court. These diplomatic ties showed that the empire was not isolated behind walls of tradition, but was an active participant in global affairs. The cultural winds were perhaps the most enduring. Music, fashion, and language all reflected a blending of traditions. Ottoman music drew from Arab, Persian, and Balkan influences, creating melodies that echoed across diverse lands. Clothing styles mixed Central Asian roots with Mediterranean elegance, producing garments admired by visitors from abroad. The Ottoman Turkish language itself became a tapestry woven from Turkish, Arabic, and Persian words, reflecting the multicultural reality of the empire. For all their openness, the Ottomans remained confident in their own identity. They were not passive recipients of outside influence. They reshaped what they absorbed into something distinctly Ottoman. A Venetian merchant visiting Istanbul might recognize Italian fabrics but would see them tailored in ways unique to the Ottoman court. A scholar from Persia might find familiar poetry but reimagined in Ottoman forms. In this sense, the empire was like a great mirror, reflecting the world but casting its own light back upon it. By the end of the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire had become not only a political and military power, but also a cultural bridge. Its mosques, markets, and schools were places where East met West, where tradition met innovation, and where influence flowed in both directions. The winds of the world shaped the empire, but the empire also shaped the winds of the world. The story of the Ottomans cannot be told as a tale of isolation. It is a story of connections, of openness, and of transformation. Their greatness was not only in the lands they conquered, but also in the ideas they embraced. This ability to blend, to adapt, and to reinvent themselves gave the empire resilience in the face of change. And yet, the same currents that strengthened them would also carry challenges. New trade routes, powerful rivals, and shifting alliances would test the empire's ability to maintain balance. In the next episode, we will see how the Ottomans entered a period of growth, expanding their reach, enriching their culture, and leaving a mark on world history that would endure for centuries. The Ottoman Empire, having secured its classical age through conquest, diplomacy, and careful governance, now entered a remarkable period of expansion and development. This was the Age of Growth, when the empire not only widened its borders but also deepened its influence on technology, economics, politics, and culture. It was during this time that the Ottomans truly became one of the central powers shaping the destiny of the early modern world. By the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire stretched across 3 continents. Its lands touched the deserts of Arabia, the mountains of the Balkans, the fertile plains of Egypt, and the waters of the Mediterranean. Few empires in history could boast such diversity. Yet the Ottomans were not content simply to rule over these territories. They sought to develop them, to connect them, and to turn their empire into a living system of power and prosperity. One of the keys to this growth was technology, particularly in the field of warfare. The Ottomans had been among the earliest states to adopt gunpowder, and during this period, they refined their military capabilities further. Cannons grew larger and more accurate. Firearms became more reliable, and fortifications were redesigned to withstand new weaponry. The Janissaries, already famous for their discipline, became one of the most formidable forces in the world. Their training and organization were admired even by their European rivals. This military edge allowed the empire to maintain its dominance and to push its influence further into Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. But the Ottomans understood that an empire could not be built on weapons alone. Trade and economics played an equally important role. The empire's position at the crossroads of continents gave it unmatched control over global commerce. Spices from India, silk from China, coffee from Yemen, and gold from Africa all passed through Ottoman lands. Istanbul became not just a political capital, but also a commercial hub, where merchants from Venice, Cairo, Aleppo, and beyond gathered. The wealth that flowed through these markets funded not only the army but also great works of architecture, education, and art. The growth of trade brought new industries to the empire. Textiles became one of the most important products, with cities like Bursa producing silk that rivaled the finest fabrics of Europe. Shipbuilding thrived in Ottoman dockyards, where massive galleys were constructed to dominate the seas. Agriculture, too, advanced, with improved irrigation systems allowing farmers to increase production. The empire fed itself and exported surplus goods, further enriching its treasury. This balance of agriculture, industry, and trade gave the Ottomans a solid economic foundation. Political growth was just as significant. The Ottomans developed a bureaucracy capable of governing millions of people across vast lands. At the heart of this system was the Timar system, which granted land revenues to soldiers and officials in exchange for their service. This not only rewarded loyalty but also ensured that the empire's lands were managed efficiently. Local administrators collected taxes, maintained order, and reported to higher officials, creating a chain of governance that reached from the smallest village to the imperial palace. The sultans of this era were more than conquerors, they were also builders. The most famous of them, Suleiman the Magnificent, combined military expansion with legal reform. His laws standardized practices across the empire, reducing corruption and ensuring fairness in taxation and property rights. It was this attention to justice that earned him the title of Kanuni, or lawgiver, among his people. His reign represented not only the peak of Ottoman power, but also the maturity of Ottoman governance. Architecture and culture flourished during this age of growth. The empire's wealth allowed for the construction of magnificent mosques, palaces, and bridges that symbolized both faith and power. The great architect Mimar Sinan left behind a legacy of masterpieces, including the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul and the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne. These buildings were not only places of worship but also centers of community life, housing schools, hospitals, and libraries. Their beauty reflected the empire's confidence and its vision of unity between the earthly and the divine. Education was another area of growth. Schools, known as madrasas, taught not only religious subjects but also mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and medicine. Scholars debated ideas that connected ancient knowledge with contemporary challenges. Libraries collected manuscripts from across the world, preserving wisdom that might otherwise have been lost. This intellectual vibrancy made the Ottoman Empire a center of learning as well as power. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of this period was the empire's role in global history. By controlling the Eastern Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and parts of the Indian Ocean, the Ottomans stood at the center of maritime trade. They were a bridge between continents, ensuring that goods, ideas, and people moved across borders. European explorers who sailed around Africa or across the Atlantic were, in part, motivated by the desire to bypass Ottoman trade routes. In this way, the Ottomans indirectly influenced the age of exploration and the rise of global empires beyond Europe. Culturally, the Ottomans blended traditions from many lands. Music drew on Arab rhythms, Persian melodies, and Balkan folk songs, creating a unique sound that resonated across the empire. literature thrived, with poets composing verses in Ottoman, Turkish, Persian, and Arabic. Calligraphy and miniature painting decorated manuscripts with elegance and color. Even cuisine reflected the empire's diversity. Meals combined spices from India, olives from the Mediterranean, rice from Persia, and coffee from Arabia into dishes that delighted palaces and villages alike. Of course, growth also brought challenges. Governing such a vast empire required constant vigilance. Communications were slow, local revolts occasionally flared, and rival powers always threatened. Yet during this age of growth, the Ottomans managed to keep balance. They combined military strength with economic wealth, political order with cultural brilliance. Few empires in history achieved such harmony at such a scale. By the close of the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire was at its height. Its armies commanded respect, its markets overflowed with goods, its cities sparkled with domes and minarets, and its influence reached across seas and deserts. The age of growth had transformed the Ottomans from a regional power into one of the defining empires of the world. And yet, as history teaches us, no age of prosperity lasts forever. Beneath the splendor, strains were beginning to appear. Economic pressures, political rivalries, and external challenges that would test the strength of the empire. In the next episode, we will explore the period of crisis, when the Ottomans faced storms that threatened the very foundations of all they had built. Every great empire faces moments when the winds of fortune shift, when the strengths that once carried it forward begin to strain under new pressures. For the Ottoman Empire, the 17th and 18th centuries were marked by such a period. Historians often call it the period of crisis, a time when war, economic troubles, and political challenges tested the resilience of the once mighty state. At the beginning of the 17th century, the Ottoman Empire still stretched across 3 continents. Yet its sheer size, which had once been a symbol of strength, became a source of difficulty. Communication across vast territories was slow. Local governors grew more independent, sometimes placing their own interests above loyalty to the Sultan. Maintaining order required endless attention, and cracks began to appear in the empire's carefully built structure. One of the most visible challenges came from war. The Ottomans had long been a military powerhouse, but now their armies faced increasingly organized and well-armed European rivals. The long war with the Habsburgs, fought between the late 16th and early 17th centuries, drained resources and exposed weaknesses. Later, in the year 1683, the empire launched a campaign to capture Vienna, a city it had besieged once before in the 16th century. The second siege of Vienna ended not in triumph but in retreat, marking a turning point. From then on, the Ottomans would be more often defending their borders than expanding them. War brought not only military defeat but also economic strain. Campaigns were expensive, and as battles dragged on, the treasury struggled to keep pace. The traditional system of land revenues, which had supported the army through the Timar system, began to break down. Soldiers who once received land in exchange for service demanded cash payments instead. Inflation rose, partly fueled by the influx of silver from the New World into Europe, which disrupted global markets. Ordinary people felt the burden through higher taxes and rising prices. Poverty and instability spread through rural areas. Farmers abandoned lands that could no longer sustain them, while bandit groups roamed the countryside. In cities, unemployment grew as industries struggled to compete with cheaper European goods. The once thriving Ottoman economy began to falter, creating discontent among both the rich and the poor. Political instability added to the crisis. The system of succession, in which brothers of the new sultan were often confined in the palace to prevent disputes, sometimes produced rulers who lacked experience. While some sultans rose to the challenge, others were indecisive or easily influenced by court factions. The role of the janissaries, once the backbone of the military, also changed. Over time, this elite corps gained political power, using their influence to resist reforms and demand privileges. What had once been a disciplined fighting force increasingly became a source of unrest. Despite these struggles, the empire did not collapse. Instead, it adapted, though often in imperfect ways. Local leaders, known as ayan, gained more authority, taking responsibility for tax collection and security in the provinces. While this reduced the central government's control, it also allowed the empire to continue functioning in difficult times. Religious leaders, too, played a stabilizing role, offering guidance and preserving traditions that helped maintain a sense of unity. Culturally, the crisis period was not without achievement. Poetry, art, and architecture continued, though often on a smaller scale than before. Coffee houses became centers of urban life where men gathered to drink, talk, and play games. These spaces reflected the growing role of ordinary people in shaping culture, even as the state struggled with larger problems. Music and literature absorbed new influences, showing that creativity could endure even in troubled times. Diplomatically, the Ottomans had to adjust to a new reality. They were no longer the unrivaled power of the Mediterranean. European states such as Austria, Russia, and later Britain and France grew stronger, building powerful armies and navies. The Ottomans signed treaties that often forced them to cede lands, such as the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, which marked the first significant loss of territory to European powers. These agreements revealed that the balance of power was shifting. For the people of the empire, the period of crisis was felt in daily life. Farmers faced uncertainty as harvests were disrupted by war or banditry. Merchants worried about shrinking profits as trade routes shifted. Families struggled under heavier taxes. And yet, amid the hardship, communities found ways to endure. Local markets continued, religious festivals brought joy, and family traditions provided comfort. The resilience of ordinary people kept the empire alive even when its leaders faltered. It is important to note that historians today view this period with nuance. While older accounts described it simply as decline, more recent studies highlight adaptation and survival. The Ottomans may have lost the momentum of expansion, but they also found ways to manage a changing world. The empire endured for centuries after these crises, proving that it was not a fragile structure destined to fall at the first challenge. Instead, it was a complex society that faced difficulties, stumbled, but carried on. By the 18th century, the Ottoman Empire was no longer the unstoppable power of the classical age. It had lost territories, its economy was strained, and its politics were complicated. Yet it remained a significant force, controlling vast lands and influencing the lives of millions. The period of crisis did not end the empire. Rather, it reshaped it, forcing the Ottomans to reconsider how to survive in a world that was rapidly changing. In the next episode, we will see how the empire responded to these challenges with efforts at reform and renewal. The period of modernization would bring bold attempts to rebuild the army, restructure the government, and embrace new technologies. The Ottomans had weathered the storm of crisis. Now they would attempt to chart a new course toward survival in the modern age. By the dawn of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire stood at a crossroads. After centuries of grandeur, expansion, and resilience, the empire had endured a long period of crisis that tested its strength. Now, faced with powerful European neighbors, changing economies, and the arrival of modern technologies, the Ottomans sought to reinvent themselves. This era became known as the period of modernization, a time of reform, adaptation, and bold experiments. The roots of modernization lay in the realization that old ways could no longer secure the empire. Survival. The Ottoman army, once feared across Europe and the Middle East, had fallen behind. European armies now drilled with modern tactics, equipped with advanced weapons and supported by strong economies. The Janissaries, once an elite fighting corps, had become resistant to change, clinging to privileges instead of innovation. Ottoman leaders understood that without reform, the empire risked falling further behind. The 19th century saw the rise of reform-minded sultans, such as Mahmud II, who recognized the urgent need for change. He sought to reorganize the military, creating a new modern army trained in European style. Uniforms were redesigned, weapons were updated, and Western military advisors were brought in to share knowledge. These reforms did not come easily, as they challenged traditions, but they marked a turning point. The empire was signaling its determination to adapt to a new world. Beyond the military, modernization spread to government institutions. The old system of land grants and tax farming gave way to new structures aimed at efficiency and fairness. The Ottoman bureaucracy expanded, staffed by educated officials trained not only in Islamic law but also in modern administration. A new sense of professionalism emerged, with schools established to train civil servants and officers in subjects such as law, science, and foreign languages. One of the most significant chapters of this modernization was the Tanzimat, or reorganization, launched in the mid-19th century. The Tanzimat reforms were sweeping changes designed to strengthen the empire by reshaping its legal and social systems. New laws promised equality before the law for all subjects, whether Muslim, Christian, or Jewish. Taxes were standardized, and efforts were made to curb corruption. For the first time, the empire sought to create a more unified identity among its diverse peoples. Education became a central focus of reform. Traditional religious schools continued to operate, but new secular schools were introduced, teaching mathematics, geography, history, and sciences. These institutions prepared a new generation for careers in government, commerce, and the military. Printing presses spread knowledge, and newspapers emerged as platforms for debate and discussion. The empire was opening itself to the flow of modern ideas, both from within and from abroad. Economically, modernization was both a necessity and a challenge. The Industrial Revolution in Europe had transformed global trade, and the Ottomans sought to catch up. Railways were built to connect distant provinces, speeding up travel and commerce. Telegraph lines brought faster communication, linking the capital of Istanbul to cities across the empire. Ports were modernized to handle growing international trade. These developments brought opportunities but also increased the empire's dependence on European investment and loans, creating both growth and vulnerability. Culturally, modernization was felt in daily life. Western styles of clothing began to appear in the cities, alongside traditional Ottoman garments. Coffeehouses and salons hosted conversations about politics, literature, and science. The arts flourished with new influences, blending European techniques with Ottoman traditions. Opera houses opened in Istanbul, while writers and poets experimented with fresh themes. It was an age of curiosity and creativity, where the empire engaged with the wider world while still cherishing its heritage. Modernization also brought questions of identity. As reforms promised equality among the empire's many religious and ethnic groups, debates arose about what it meant to be an Ottoman. Could Muslims, Christians, and Jews share a common loyalty to the empire? The Tanzimat reforms attempted to foster a sense of unity, but differences remained. Nationalist movements, inspired by ideas from Europe, began to take root among Greeks, Serbs, Armenians, and Arabs, each seeking greater autonomy or independence. Modernization, while strengthening the state, also awakened new aspirations that challenged imperial unity. Despite challenges, the reform period showed remarkable resilience. The Ottoman leadership did not simply resign itself to decline. It sought to engage with modernity on its own terms. The empire negotiated treaties, built alliances, and tried to balance European pressure with its own needs. Istanbul became a cosmopolitan hub, where diplomats, merchants, and intellectuals from across the world crossed paths. The empire was no longer the dominant superpower of earlier centuries, but it remained a significant player on the global stage. The modernization period also revealed the adaptability of Ottoman society. In villages, farmers embraced new crops and tools when possible. In towns, artisans adjusted their crafts to meet new tastes. Women, though still limited by traditional roles, began to find new spaces for education and participation, especially in the cities. The empire's vast diversity of peoples, Turks, Arabs, Greeks, Armenians, Kurds, Jews, and many others, continued to shape its cultural richness even as politics shifted. By the late 19th century, the Ottoman Empire had undergone profound changes. It was not the same empire that had once stood at the gates of Vienna or ruled the entire eastern Mediterranean. It was leaner, more complex, and in many ways more fragile. Yet, it was also more modern, with new institutions, ideas, and connections to the wider world. The modernization period did not erase the challenges of the past, but it gave the empire tools to face the future. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Ottomans stood on the threshold of even greater transformations. The empire had reformed its army, reorganized its government, and embraced new technologies. But it also faced the rising tide of nationalism, the pressure of European powers, and the question of how to balance tradition with modernity. These struggles would shape its final century and leave a lasting mark on the world. In the next episode, we will explore how the Ottoman Empire, even in its later years, continued to play a vital role in global history. The empire's diplomacy, trade, and cultural influence extended far beyond its borders, proving that even as it changed, the Ottoman legacy remained deeply woven into the story of the modern world. The Ottoman Empire was not simply a regional power confined to its own borders. For more than 6 centuries, it played a decisive role in shaping the course of world history. Its influence stretched across continents, affecting politics, trade, culture, and even the imagination of distant peoples who may never have set foot within its territories. To understand the world we live in today, one must recognize the far-reaching role that the Ottomans played. From its earliest days, the empire sat at the crossroads of continents. Its lands connected Europe, Asia, and Africa, making it a hub of exchange. Caravans carrying silk and spices from the east passed through Ottoman lands, while ships sailed across Ottoman-controlled seas with goods from the Mediterranean and beyond. Istanbul, once known as Constantinople, became not only a capital city but also a global marketplace, where merchants from Venice, Cairo, Damascus, and India met. In this way, the Ottomans were guardians of some of the most important trade routes in history. This control over trade had profound global consequences. When European powers in the 15th and 16th centuries sought new paths to Asia, it was partly because Ottoman dominance of the eastern Mediterranean made traditional routes costly. The great voyages of exploration, Christopher Columbus sailing west, Vasco da Gama rounding Africa, were shaped by the reality of Ottoman strength. Thus, the Age of Discovery, which reshaped the entire globe, was indirectly influenced by the empire's position at the heart of trade. In politics, the Ottomans were central players in the balance of power. For centuries, European rulers measured their ambitions against the strength of the sultans. Diplomats in London, Paris, and Vienna watched Ottoman affairs closely, knowing that a change in Istanbul could affect their own kingdoms. At times, Christian powers even sought Ottoman support against rival Christian states, showing that alliances often outweighed religious differences. In this way, the empire became a pivotal factor in European politics. Beyond Europe, the Ottomans played an important role in the Islamic world. As protectors of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, they were guardians of Islam's most sacred sites. Pilgrims from every corner of the Muslim world traveled safely under Ottoman rule, binding diverse peoples together in shared faith. The Sultan also held the title of Caliph, giving him symbolic authority over Muslims beyond the empire's borders. This spiritual dimension gave the Ottomans a role not just as rulers of land, but as leaders of a vast religious community. Culturally, the Ottoman Empire was a bridge between civilizations. Its art and architecture drew from Byzantine, Persian, Arab, and Turkish traditions, creating something uniquely its own. The great mosques of Istanbul, with their graceful domes and minarets, became symbols of both faith and beauty. Ottoman calligraphy, textiles, and ceramics traveled far, admired in courts and markets across Europe and Asia. Even in distant lands, people encountered and were inspired by Ottoman creativity. Food and lifestyle, too, carried Ottoman influence far beyond the empire's borders. Coffee, which spread from the Middle East through Ottoman lands, became a global habit. The coffeehouse culture that flourished in Istanbul later appeared in London, Paris, and Vienna, where it became a center of intellectual life. Ottoman cuisine, rich with flavors of spices, fruits, and grains, influenced diets from the Balkans to the Levant. To this day, dishes like baklava, kebabs, and Turkish delight remind us of this legacy. The Ottomans also played a role in shaping ideas about law and governance. Their system of religious tolerance, though imperfect, offered a model of coexistence for diverse communities. Christians and Jews lived as dhimmis, protected peoples who paid special taxes but maintained their faith and institutions. This arrangement allowed many cultures to flourish side by side. While debates continue about its fairness, the Ottoman approach showed that large empires could survive not by enforcing uniformity, but by embracing diversity. At the same time, the empire's struggles also shaped world history. The decline of Ottoman control in the Balkans, for example, gave rise to nationalist movements that influenced European politics. The Eastern Question, what would happen to Ottoman lands as the empire weakened, dominated international diplomacy in the 19th century. Rivalries over Ottoman territory contributed to the tensions that eventually erupted into the First World War. In this sense, the Ottoman story was intertwined with some of the most significant events of modern history. Science and knowledge were also part of the Ottoman contribution. Scholars in medicine, astronomy, and geography preserved and advanced traditions of learning. They translated works, conducted observations, and maintained libraries. While Europe surged ahead during the scientific revolution, the Ottomans played a vital role in transmitting knowledge between East and West. Their cities remained centers of learning where ideas flowed across cultures. The Ottoman role in history was not only about high politics or great battles, but also about everyday connections. A Greek fisherman in the Aegean, an Armenian merchant in Anatolia, a Jewish physician in Salonika, an Arab scholar in Damascus, all were part of the Ottoman world. Their lives were shaped by imperial policies, but they also shaped the empire in return. This blend of peoples created a mosaic whose influence extended far beyond its borders. Perhaps most importantly, the Ottoman Empire challenged the idea of where the center of the world should be. For Europeans, it was a reminder that power and culture did not belong to the West alone. For Muslims, it was proof that their civilization remained vital and global. For people of many faiths and identities, it was a place where differences met, clashed, and mingled, leaving a legacy still visible today. By the time the 19th century ended, the Ottoman Empire was no longer the vast, unstoppable force it had once been. Yet its role in world history had already been secured. It had influenced exploration, trade, religion, culture, and politics on a global scale. Its contributions, both material and spiritual, reached into the lives of millions and continue to echo into the present. In our final episode, we will turn to the empire's legacy and future. Though the empire itself would not survive the 20th century, its cultural, political, and social legacies remain alive today. From the modern nation of Turkey to the cuisines, arts, and traditions of former Ottoman lands, the story continues, reminding us that history never truly ends, but lives on in the present. When an empire lasts for more than 6 centuries, its influence cannot simply vanish when its political structure comes to an end. The Ottoman Empire may have dissolved in the early 20th century, but its legacy continues to shape nations, cultures, and identities today. To speak of the Ottomans is not only to remember the past, it is also to understand the present and to glimpse possibilities for the future. The most immediate legacy of the Ottoman Empire is the modern Republic of Turkey, founded in the year 1923. Emerging from the ashes of the empire after the First World War, Turkey inherited not only the Ottoman capital of Istanbul but also centuries of cultural, architectural, and social traditions. Though the Republic deliberately turned toward a new identity, emphasizing secularism and modernization, the Ottoman past remains deeply woven into its character. The domes and minarets of Istanbul's skyline, the rhythms of Turkish music, and the flavors of its cuisine all bear the imprint of the empire. But the Ottoman legacy extends far beyond the borders of modern Turkey. In the Balkans, the Middle East, and North Africa, Ottoman rule left behind cities, roads, mosques, bridges, and markets that still serve communities today. In Sarajevo, Mostar, Damascus, Cairo, and many other places, one can walk through streets where Ottoman architecture and urban planning shaped daily life. These are not ruins of a forgotten empire. They are living spaces, used and cherished by new generations. The empire's cultural influence also lives on in traditions of food, art, and music. Ottoman cuisine, a blend of Central Asian, Middle Eastern, and Mediterranean flavors, continues to delight palates across many nations. From baklava and börek to coffee and tea rituals, shared tastes connect people across borders once united under the Ottomans. In music, instruments and styles developed during the empire's centuries still echo in folk songs and classical compositions alike. These cultural threads remind us that the Ottoman world was never confined to a single people, but was a mosaic of many. Linguistically, too, the Ottomans left their mark. For centuries, Ottoman Turkish absorbed words from Arabic, Persian, Greek, Armenian, and many other languages spoken within the empire. In turn, Ottoman words spread outward, finding their way into Balkan languages and beyond. Even today, traces of Ottoman vocabulary remain embedded in everyday speech across southeastern Europe and the Middle East, silent witnesses to a shared history. Another part of the Ottoman legacy lies in the idea of coexistence. The empire's system of governing diverse religious and ethnic communities was not perfect, but it demonstrated a model of multicultural society. Christians, Jews, and Muslims lived under the same state, often maintaining their own traditions while contributing to the broader fabric of society. In a world where diversity is both celebrated and challenged, the Ottoman experience offers lessons, both successes and failures, about how different groups can live together. At the same time, the Ottoman legacy is also complex and contested. For some, the empire represents a golden age of culture and stability. For others, it recalls memories of lost autonomy or difficult times. Nationalist movements of the 19th and 20th centuries often defined themselves in contrast to Ottoman rule, and that memory still influences how people in former Ottoman lands view the past. Legacy, then, is not a single story. It is many stories, layered and intertwined. In global history, the Ottomans left a legacy of connectivity. By linking 3 continents, they helped create pathways of exchange that shaped the modern world. The spread of goods, ideas, and people under Ottoman rule contributed to globalization long before the term existed. Today, as nations grapple with the challenges of interdependence, the Ottoman example reminds us that connections between regions are not new, but deeply rooted in history. The future of the Ottoman legacy lies in how we remember and learn from it. Scholars continue to study the empire's vast archives, uncovering details about daily life, trade, art, and governance. Museums preserve artifacts that tell the story of a society both traditional and innovative. Travelers visit Ottoman sites, walking through courtyards, bazaars, and palaces that bring history alive. Each generation interprets the Ottoman past in new ways, drawing inspiration or caution from its lessons. For young people growing up today, the Ottoman story offers a sense of wonder. It is the tale of an empire that began with a small principality and grew to connect worlds. It is a story of resilience, adaptation, and creativity. It is also a reminder that no empire, however powerful, is eternal, and that true legacy is measured not in territory but in ideas, culture, and human spirit. As we look to the future, the Ottoman legacy challenges us to think about unity and diversity. How can societies embrace many identities while still fostering shared values? How can traditions be preserved while still welcoming innovation? How can lessons of the past guide solutions for today's global challenges? These questions remain relevant, not only in former Ottoman lands, but everywhere. The story of the Ottoman Empire is therefore not just history. It is a living dialogue between past and present. Its mosques and palaces stand as monuments, but its deeper legacy lies in the everyday lives of people who cook its recipes, sing its songs, speak its words, and walk its streets. The empire may no longer exist, but its spirit continues, reminding us that history is never truly behind us. In closing, the Ottoman Empire's journey, from its humble beginnings on the Anatolian frontier to its role as a world power through crisis, reform, and transformation, offers us a mirror. It reflects both the heights of human creativity and the challenges of maintaining unity in a diverse and changing world. Its legacy is not one of mere nostalgia, but of living influence. And as we look toward the future, we carry with us the echoes of the Ottomans, woven into the global story of humanity. And that brings us to the end of this chapter in the story of the Ottoman Empire. From humble beginnings to moments of triumph and challenge, every step reveals how deeply this empire shaped the world we know today. History is never just about the past. It's about the lessons we carry into the present and the future. If you found this journey fascinating, make sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which part of Ottoman history surprised you the most? Your support helps us bring more stories of forgotten empires, hidden histories, and the moments that changed the world. Thank you for watching, and join me in the next episode as we continue uncovering the legacy of the Ottomans, an empire whose echoes still shape our lives.